This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, former Representative Connie Wilson, former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker, and current John Locke Foundation President John Hood. We got a packed show for you this week, starting with our analysis of the primary elections. And if we get an opportunity, we're going to take a first look at the short session of the General Assembly that starts next week. Let's get started. Even though a large percentage of registered voters stayed home, the field is now set for the general elections in November. We want our panel to give us their views on what the voters said. Question one to all. What was the biggest surprise to you in these primary elections? Dennis Wicker, I'll start with you.
Actually, there were two for me, Tom. I think that one surprise was the light voter turnout. With the spirited Republican primaries, and there were many of them, starting with the U.S. Senate race, of course. And Republicans are known to vote more in the off years than Democrats. I thought it'd be a lot more of a turnout, and it turned out not to be. The other one, to me, that was a surprise is Clark Jenkins losing his seat in the Senate. Clark had been there a long time, and I just felt like he would probably win again, and he was upset to lose yesterday.
John Hood.
Like Dennis, I have to go fairly far down the ballot to find something that really surprised me, because I didn't think most of the statewide and congressional races were particularly surprising. So I was surprised that Robert Brawley, state representative from Iredell County, who has represented that area off and on for something like more than 2 decades, was defeated narrowly for re-election in the primary. I was surprised by that. John Fraley, I believe, was the person who defeated him.
Chris?
I guess two things. One isn't who won, but the nature of it. I think Representative Alma Adams winning outright in Greensboro in a district that is a little bit tilted towards Charlotte. I think winning without a runoff, I think she might have led the ballot. I thought that was a surprise. And secondly, I think especially the margin of victory, State Senator Gladys Robinson defeating former county commissioner and NAACP head Skip Alston. I think we even predicted on the show that was a toss-up, or some people thought Skip Alston might win. He was endorsed by business groups. He was endorsed by the Academy of Trial Lawyers or Citizens for Justice, and Gladys Robinson won handily.
Connie.
Senator Ralph Heiss had a very contentious primary race up in the mountains, and Scenic put in at least $200,000 in independent expenditure there. And it actually was a very strong race for Senator Heiss. He ran extremely well, even with that money against him. So I think there were many that were thinking that it was going to be much closer there. And I also think David Rouser's race, the spread was much larger than most people thought.
Dennis, let's talk about the headline event, the GOP Senate primary. Did House Speaker Thom Tillis perform as you had expected he would?
I think he actually maybe exceeded expectations somewhat, Tom. He had to get over 40% with 8 people in that race. He did that. He had to be the establishment candidate to get by the Tea Party and the evangelist side of the Republican Party. He held them at bay. And I think that when you look at that, you have to ask yourself, what does all that mean? And I think when you have, I think Tom will probably suffer some legislative hangover going into a Senate race, in the fall. And it was a light voter turnout, so you don't know if that's a sample of what you'll see in November. But I think he ought to be quite pleased at his victory.
John, I want to dovetail on something the Lieutenant Governor said about the Tea Party. There were a lot of people that are speculating that mainstream Republicans beat the Tea Party in this particular race. You said in a National Review article the day after the election that what you thought happened was, particularly with Greg Brannon, that he punched below his weight class. Explain what you mean.
Well, he got national endorsements. There was a lot of interest, statewide and national, in his race. And I think Brandon basically demonstrated an unsurprising fact, which is that if you are a first-time candidate, not very well prepared to be a candidate, your primary involvement in politics is as a talk show guest, no offense to my colleagues, and I guess myself, you may not really be ready for this kind of a race. And in fact, what happened was most Republican voters who were sympathetic to the Tea Party or at least a plurality of them, actually voted for Tillis. So to describe
thinking
all of
that he had the best chance of winning in November?
He was perfectly fine from their perspective. Remember that, again, the national folks didn't understand this because they were just trying to fit North Carolina into a national story. But in North Carolina, you know that the legislature, for whether you like it or not, enacted significant conservative reforms over the last 3 years. Tillis was one of the leaders of that effort. It was very difficult to describe him as anything but conservative.
Connie, I got to talk about the Supreme Court race featuring Justice Robin Hudson, Eric Levinson, and Jeanette Doran. Before the vote, former Republican gubernatorial candidate Richard Vinroot wrote an op-ed piece in the Charlotte Observer calling the ads against Hudson despicable, announcing that he intended to vote for her. Some are suggesting that instead of hurting Hudson, these ads actually ended up helping her. Do you agree with that?
I think damaging ads like that do harm no matter what. They probably raised her ID, but I think it still did the harm. You know, years ago, the races used to be partisan, and that actually helped voters a lot because they could kind of figure out philosophically where each party person was. And now you're getting more campaigns there. I know that attorneys really don't like those type of ads because they're more purist, but those ads, similar type ads ran,
so, Chris,
how's
this going to affect the November general election? Is Hudson going to be able to continue the support, the large amount of support she saw?
Well, it'll be interesting. I mean, I think we'll see a larger Democratic turnout in the fall. I don't think a lot of Democrats are rushing to the polls because Kay Hagan's renomination was all but assured. So I think she has a really good chance. It also says that you just can't have negative independent expenditures against somebody. You have to run your own campaign. Jeanette Doran really didn't do that. Her whole campaign was somebody else bashing Robin Hudson for her.
After these messages, we're going to cover the congressional and local races. Remember, NC Spin's now being aired on Time Warner cable systems except in the Raleigh-Durham area. To learn the time and channel listing, you can consult the ncspin.com website. Also, you can watch NC Spin anytime you want on Time Warner On Demand or the ncspin.com website. We post each week's show on Friday, so view us anytime you like. And let us hear from you. ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or NC Spin tweets.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's important for farmers and hunters to work together. Farmers own a majority of North Carolina hunting land, and besides, we're often hunters too. We share the same North Carolina values that we'll pass on to future generations. We share the desire to enjoy the land and our leisure time. Together, we can respect the land, our natural resources, and our privacy.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
The best part about being a member of a Touchstone Energy Cooperative is that it's your Touchstone Energy Cooperative. Learn more about the power of your co-op membership at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
We're continuing our rundown of Tuesday's primary elections, and we want to get into the congressional races. Let's move to the 2nd Congressional District. Renee Elmers won her primary, but the Keith Crisco-Clay Aiken contest was a lot closer than a lot of people had expected. Chris, what happened here, and how's this going to play out in November?
Well, you're right about Renee Elmers, although I don't think she had a serious candidate who had any money. Frank Roach, a talk show host himself, who didn't, I don't think, mount a serious campaign. But the Keith Crisco, Clay Aiken race was very close. You had a sort of a traditional candidate in Keith Crisco, a conservative Democrat who spent a significant amount of money, was on TV, versus Clay Aiken, who everybody knows who he is, who I think did, by getting more votes, did demonstrate that he's a serious candidate. The question is what will happen in the fall. It's an overwhelmingly Republican district. It would be a huge upset if Renee Elmers wasn't reelected.
Dennis, over in the 3rd District, Walter Jones, who you served with many years over in the House, now a congressman, faced a very stiff primary from Taylor Griffin. It wasn't decided until very late in the evening when he finally surged ahead. What does that tell you?
Well, Congressman Jones escaped again on this. You know, it's been getting closer and closer with him. I think what really helped Walter Jones was the deep, wide name recognition and respect that his family has up in that part of the state. His father and the Jones name still carries a lot of weight up there, and I think that carried him through that election the other day.
Connie, we briefly touched on it earlier, but in the 6th Congressional District, we won't know who's going to win that until after a July runoff. Front-runner Phil Berger didn't get the 40% that he needed to win outright. And second-place finisher Mark Walker has already announced he wants to seek a runoff. Were you surprised by this?
There were so many very active, funded candidates that I'm not surprised at all. The campaigns were run extremely well. They were very aggressive with negative campaigns, ads that were also going out there. So I don't think anybody was surprised, and I think it's going to be a very close primary that we see.
John, last week we had talked about the 7th Congressional District, Mike McIntyre's seat that he stepped down from. I think if I remember correctly, you indicated you thought David Rouser would win that race, and he did very handedly against Woody White. What inspired the voters the way they did?
They saw this program and wanted to make sure that I was correct.
I've been thinking that myself for years.
They didn't want to embarrass me by making me look bad. Rouser had run in the district before. That helps. He's from the northwestern part of the district, the Raleigh area. That helps a lot. Johnston County is a significant part of the district. Woody White was also hurt by ads run against him by the chamber, describing him as a trial attorney, which is maybe not all that popular in a Republican primary. It was not a close race, but Woody White, who's the chairman of the county commission in New Hanover, still has a political future ahead of him. Just wasn't going to happen this year.
You mentioned the 12th Congressional District, and I think you did, Alma Adams. Right. She was one of 2 candidates from Greensboro. The majority of the voters are actually in the Charlotte area. Right. What happened that she pulled this out and won without having to have a runoff?
I think, well, a couple things. One is there were several candidates from Charlotte, some of whom split the vote, Malcolm Graham and George Battle, and another was Smuggy Mitchell. I just wanted to say Smuggy on his spin.
He had more or less dropped out.
Right, but his name was still there. He did get some votes. I mean, Alma Adams lined up support early in this race. She had
just don't mention Fatback McLean.
Fatback McSwain.
McSwain.
No, she lined up the money and the support of a lot of progressive people all the way through the districts early on. She actually had an independent expenditure on her behalf against Malcolm Graham, so all that helped her win.
All right, let's talk some more about what took place here. John, early voting produced more votes in fewer days than was the case in 2010. You wrote a column saying that despite predictions that it was going to suppress voters, this wasn't the case. Tell us why you said that.
Well, the political science literature on this is actually fairly clear. We had a tremendous growth of early voting in North Carolina and in other states over the last several cycles. We also had rising voter turnout. People assumed that they were related, except that states that didn't do early voting also had a similar rise in voter turnout. And it turns out when you do something like 17 days or more of early voting, you're just spreading it out in such a way there isn't a whole lot of excitement. And so while you give people more opportunities to vote in terms of days, you actually depress the interest level a little bit. Whereas if you have a shorter period with more polling locations and more hours, the turnout effect appears to be minimal.
But how much of that
zero.
turnout, Connie, can you attribute to the fact that there were some hotly contested races here and that people wanted to go to vote in the primaries, maybe more so than we had in 2010? How much of a factor was that?
I think people like the convenience of early voting, and more people are doing it just because they're like, it's not worth, standing in line. Probably no lines on primary day this week, but they don't want to have to leave work, have to work it into their schedule. Just go when it's convenient.
All right. There was a tight race, Chris, we've got to talk about for the 10th District Attorney's District in Wake County, in which, taking Colin Willoughby's place, Jeff Cruden and John Bryant ended up very close, and it appears there's going to be a runoff there for the Republican nomination. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I don't know. I think it'll be very close. And on the Democratic side, Lauren Freeman, the clerk of court, won handily, despite the fact that the State Employees Association was working very hard for her opponent. And as John has pointed out many times, this is just the reason people listening or watching need to know about this race is that this is the district attorney's office that prosecutes political corruption. Anything that happens in Raleigh on the political scene, this is the DA's office that's in charge of it. So this is sort of like the state DA almost. I mean, this is a big deal. And I think we'll see a competitive race.
All right, very briefly, in just a few seconds left. All right, the stage is set for the November general elections. Tell us very quickly what we might expect as this plays out. Anybody want to take a stab at this?
The two competitive races are the statewide races for U.S. Senate, Kay Hagan and Tom Tillis, and Supreme Court, Eric Levinson and the incumbent Robin Hudson. But the congressional seats, I think, are pretty much already determined. There won't be much change in the legislature. And if you really want more competitive races, you have to go past the congressional legislative and look at counties where there's still lots of very interesting
Anybody
races.
Disagree with that? Anything else?
No, but I would just like one quick thing about Tillis. You know, it's not it hasn't been lost on some people. The majority of Republicans who voted last Tuesday in the Republican primary did not vote for Tom Tillis. And he spent 10 times more than any other candidate. I think he did about what's expected, but it wasn't an overwhelming, convincing, this is our candidate for the future if he didn't get 50%, given all the advantages he had. Remember, the number 2 guy didn't spend a dime on TV.
Yeah, at the legislative level, if you look at the most recent campaign reports, the Republicans are much better funded than the Democrats, and that's going to play in heavily. You're going to see a lot of
Dennis, you were going to make a comment.
Well, I was just going to say that's what I meant when I talked about Speaker Tillis getting 45%. What does that mean? 55% didn't vote for him in a very light primary vote. And I think John is right. I think that that race and the Supreme Court race will be very key races and what's coming up. I suspect that we'll see a little more of a turnout in this election than in past elections, particularly for Democrats. I really think the Democrats are more energized than people realize about what's happened in the General Assembly and what's going on out there.
All right, after these messages, we're going to take a quick look at what we can expect in the short session of the legislature that convenes this week.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely. Building on North Carolina's medical home model, better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. And we are ready for your call.
1 in 5 North Carolinians can't buy healthy foods in their communities, increasing their risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and some forms of cancer. Learn more at accesshealthyfoodsnc.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
We want to take a quick look at the legislation and the short session that's going to start this coming week. Originally, it was intended to review and reset the state budget. Last week, it was disclosed that the so-called April surprise was actually more of a disappointment, and our state budget might encounter a shortfall of $445 million. Connie, you served for a lot of years in the House. What effect is this going to have on this short session, especially as far as pay raises for teachers and state employees?
Well, the nice thing about this shortfall is that it's all within the withholding category of revenue that the state takes in, and it's because rates were reduced and they broadened who was taxed. They're really anticipating that it's just going to be a few more months back in 2015 when they will actually collect that money. So it gives the budget writers some flexibility to use one-time money temporarily, knowing that this other money's coming. So it doesn't look good, but it could be a lot worse.
Dennis, Governor McCrory this week announced that he's going to advocate a 2% pay raise for teachers and at the same time implement an aggressive performance pay plan. Can he get this through the legislature, and how's that going to impact this budget shortfall?
Well, it's going to be difficult. I mean, when you're almost $500 million in the hole going into the session, it's going to be very hard, I think, to find the money to pay teachers that and the other needs that are going to be on the table for the legislature to consider.
Well, let's just be clear about this. The shortfall is not for the coming fiscal year.
I
understand. The shortfall is in the current fiscal year, and it's covered by reserves. The actual revenue effect in the next fiscal year is about $160 million. That's what affects the ability to do pay raises and other things, and that is apparently going to be accounted for in the governor's budget.
Well, plus they've already allocated, Chris, close to $100 million for the raise and beginning teachers' pay. Right. It looks to me like the numbers aren't adding up in here real carefully.
Well, the big worry is that they're going to use a lot of one-time money to pay for recurring expenses. That'll be the question, whether or not they're willing to do that. They left a lot of money unspent in both of the years of the biennium, and that's a bad budget practice that Republicans themselves criticized when they were in the minority. I hope they're not going to do that again.
But again, the shortfall for the current fiscal year is mostly non-recurring
I understand that,
revenue,
but there's money
so that's what you have reserves for. To cover non-recurring.
To cover this year's shortfall.
For next year.
For next year.
Next year is a much smaller number, and they've still got significant revenue growth.
John, how do you project that? You hadn't even had the projections for next year.
Well, and their projections,
yes, they do.
Their they missed the revenue projections
exactly
this
what
year.
I was going to say.
Did. A lot of it actually didn't even have to do with tax reform at all. It has to do with the fact that federal tax changes meant that people shifted their capital gains realizations to 2012 instead of 2013. So the 2012 number was artificially inflated. 2013 number was low. That's a one-time thing. It's not a recurring event.
Well, we'll see as this plays out a little further. It looks to me like the budget math's not working out here. When we come back after these messages, we'll ask our panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The physician-patient relationship is at the heart of what medicine is about. And so to have a third party telling you, the physician, or you, the patient, where you can have a test, where you can have surgery, or whether you can or cannot, seems completely outside of the realm of reasonable thinking. It's getting a third party who has no business telling us and the patients where to go out of the mix, directly increasing competition, which does nothing but benefit the patient. I'm Dr. Mac Aldridge, and I support CON reform now.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
NCAnimalAg.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
We now come to the part of the show you tell us that you like the best, the time when we ask our panelists to tell us something we don't know. They choose the topic, sound off on it for a few seconds. Chris Fitzsimon, we'll start with you.
Governor McCrory's plan to turn the economic development efforts in North Carolina over to a private nonprofit corporation are proceeding, but running into a lot of problems. There'll be legislation taken up this summer, but Richard Lindenmuth is having problems selling the program, talking about how to raise money. He recently made a big error claiming that our public records law cost North Carolina a Toyota plant, and that Texas got. Texas's law is exactly the same as ours. He really doesn't seem to know what he's talking about.
Connie.
I think you're going to see Speaker Tillis come in and actually be more influential in his role as Speaker than he was even last year, because he is a Republican nominee. Even though there may be some people in both Republican caucuses that aren't really fond of him, they want to make sure that he looks good so they can beat Kay Hagan in the fall.
Interesting. Dennis.
Women are going to have a big impact on the election in November. Yesterday, 10% more women voted than men in the primary. I think with the women's issues that will be on the minds of many of the voters in the state in the fall, you're going to see an energy among women.
Well, will they turn out?
They'll turn out. They're going to come. They're coming.
John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
There were some election results, Tom, that we haven't talked about yet. There were 4 votes to raise the sales tax in 4 different counties, and the voters gave 3 Bs and a D. Bertie, Bladen, and Brunswick counties all said no, and Davidson got it wrong, got a D, and said yes to higher sales taxes.
I was getting ready to ask you.
But at least it goes for the cause of building a high school.
Okay. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.